You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
The diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda has never been more important or visible than it is today. Interest around the topic has risen hugely year on year around the world, shown by search trend data, and it is impacting all aspects of business from marketing to recruiting. This makes being relevant across a diverse spectrum of audiences absolutely critical for the luxury industry. My guest on The Luxury Item is Tiara Chesmer-Williams, Vice President and Global Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Moët Hennessy, the wine and spirits division of luxury giant LVMH. In this role, Tiara punctuates Moët Hennessy's commitment to building a deeply inclusive, diverse, and equitable workplace by collaborating across the organization to develop and lead strategies that align with the organization's business and accelerate IDE actions and results. Tiara works closely with LVMH to ensure that Moët Hennessy North America principles and practices are consistent with those of the LVMH Group and serves as a member of the Moët Hennessy Global DE&I Leadership Committee, leading Moët Hennessy North America in the implementation of a global action plan. Welcome to The Luxury Item, Tiara.
Thank you, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
So glad you can join me this morning. So I think a great place to start is if you can tell us a little bit about your role at Moët Hennessy USA.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Vice President and Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. I know you more commonly hear the acronym DEI, but we actually lead with the I, which is inclusion. I'm a strong believer that if we don't have inclusion right, then the other components will not gel together and this strategy will not work. So being the head of IDE, I level a strategy that is based off of 4 pillars. So that is people, brand, business, and culture. So people really being those people-focused initiatives really centered around HR. So recruiting, retention, intentional investment into our diverse employees. So we're creating a pipeline of diverse leadership, as well as looking at that from the junior pipeline level. So creating an internship that is focused on diverse students where they're coming into our organization for a summer. And then we're asking a portion of that cohort to return and work with us for 2 years. And this also includes time abroad with one of our maisons. So that's the people function. Moving on to brand. We're really looking at all of our brands throughout the Moët Hennessy portfolio and ensuring that they have inclusive partnerships, inclusive marketing, and really filling those gaps of demographics that they may not be currently touching or thinking of at the moment. Moving to business, that is all around supplier diversity. We have some really exciting movement around supplier diversity, as well as our internal platform, as well as how external vendors and diverse-owned businesses can get involved. I think we may touch on that a little bit later. And the last part of my remit as the head of IDE is culture. And culture really encompasses those traditional DEI trainings, just for sake of everyone knowing that acronym. So really trainings around unconscious bias, microaggressions, our inclusive leadership program, as well as managing our amazing 6 ERGs, really spanning across all different demographics. So a pretty big remit, and I gave you a lot there, but hopefully that sums it up.
When you joined the company, was there a defined IDE strategy?
There was not. So they have been obviously ingrained in the community, Hennessy specifically being one of the first partners of the National Urban League and NAACP. But they did not have an official strategy. So they had consultants around DEI work, but I am really the first person who was hired full-time into this role and creating a strategy around these initiatives.
And how has it evolved since you've joined?
Oh, it's evolved a ton just because I have great leaders and great buy-in throughout the organization. And when you think of wines and spirits, we have to be relevant within culture, within community, and so on, and really give that authentic touch points to those communities so those relationships last and we have that brand loyalty.
Before joining Moët Hennessy, you were in the financial world, first at Blackstone working on private equity and hedge fund deals, then moved over to Morgan Stanley in wealth management. You started DEI efforts at Blackstone. Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at Blackstone. I dreamed of being this woman on Wall Street and honestly just going where the money was. I knew that financial professionals made a ton of money, they were making a difference, and so on. And that's where I dreamed my career would always begin and end. But when I entered into the financial industry, I had a bit of an epiphany or realization that as I was being invested into, mentored, and promoted, I didn't see many people that looked like me, meaning
Mhm.
women, especially women of color. And I wanted to do something about that. So I really started on different initiatives within Blackstone, helping them create a diversity council, looking at what this looks like from both an internal and external perspective, meaning different ways of recruiting, different places to recruit from. Um, and really help them with their efforts, so much so that I started doing that work full time. And that's really where my career began within the DEI space. And that is close to 20 years ago. So as you
Mm.
can probably tell from my voice and the things that I speak about, this is definitely not only my career and my job, but my passion. So
Yeah. You jump from the financial industry to wine and spirits. Were the IDE issues you were witnessing in the wine and spirits industry vastly different than the financial industry?
no, actually, they were very similar. I think there are different nuances just because of um, the background. So when you think of ultra high net clientele that I was working with at Blackstone and Morgan Stanley, there's definitely some similarities just because we deal with the same type of clientele, being a luxury company. So those were the same, but I think the nuances were, although I had a global remit, I think with Moët Hennessy specifically dealing with a French company, specifically where heritage all lies in France,
Mhm.
just the level of education and nuances and differences between the US history and the French history, and really communicating that and differentiating what is ignorance and what is coming from malice. So I think you really have to have a good gauge on what that is, and looking at that in different ways. And I don't mean ignorance in a bad term. I mean
Right.
really relating to a person's exposure to different types of people.
Moët Hennessy USA's parent LVMH describes itself as diverse by nature, with a workforce consisting of more than 190 nationalities and people from 4 generations operating in more than 80 countries. How do you work with LVMH to ensure that your principles and practices are on the same page?
We work extremely closely. And the great thing about working for the MH and LVMH is
Mhm.
that we get to partner with all aspects of the business. So whether it's fashion or beauty or hotels or makeup or perfumes, we have no competition in those spaces. So it's really a great space to be in. We aligned with the LVMH DEI strategy very closely. Corey Smith, who runs DEI for the US for LVMH, has a strategy that is based off of people, brand, and business. As mentioned before, mine is people, brand, business, and culture. So we align and really include some of the LVMH goals into our own. One being that LVMH has a goal to spend $1 billion, with diverse suppliers.
Mhm.
One of Moët Hennessy's goals specifically is to encompass more than 50% of that goal. So we have big shoes to fill. But I think we're doing a great job, and on track to meet that goal.
So there are some nuances to the overall strategy that are unique to Moët Hennessy versus LVMH.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones, Scott, is the majority of our sister companies throughout LVMH are retail, where we are not. We are three-tiered system. If you know anything about the wines and spirits industry,
Mhm.
we do not own the route to the consumer. So we are not retailers. We are only a supplier. So the differences are really there, where some of our sister brands, if you think of a Louis Vuitton or a Christian Dior, are really focused on that workforce within the stores. So we don't have stores, so ours is a bit different.
It'd be great if you can share with my audience some of the IDE programs and initiatives, Moët Hennessy USA, ones that you've been most proud of.
Yeah, I think one of the I'll name a couple. So first and foremost, I talked about our amazing ERGs. We have 6 of them encompassing women, LGBTQIA community, parents, Asian community, Black community, as well as Hispanic community. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is our parent collective increasing our parental leave from 6 to 16 weeks. So that was a huge accomplishment. Another is looking at our gender pay gap and reducing that gap to under 1%. I believe it's close to like 0.2 or something like that. So it's barely anything at this point. One other is something that I alluded to when I was speaking about the business pillar of my strategy, which is supplier diversity. Supplier diversity is something near and dear to me. I really feel like we need to give back to our communities, and this is one way that we do it. We have an internal platform that is actually owned by a diverse owned business. It is a diverse owned business, excuse me, called Supplier Gateway. Our employees can go into this platform, and I'm going to give you an example. Let's say it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and we want to be very intentional about spending with Hispanic-owned businesses. So we check a Hispanic box, we put in a keyword capability, and every Hispanic vendor that is on that platform that offers that capability populates. Therefore, we can be very intentional about our spend. In addition to that, we are actually sponsoring 1,000 diverse-owned businesses to be certified. And this really differentiates us from a lot of our competitors and what they're doing in this space. So something I'm very proud of.
You said in a Fast Company article that the most important element in building equity and representation is curiosity. A curious mindset enables us to continually expand our knowledge and perspectives. What are some of the ways a company can build a culture of curiosity? Maybe share an example from Moët Hennessy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for listening to that or reading that article, excuse me.
Sure.
I think one of the most important values that we have at Moët Hennessy that really not only drives our talent, but drives our business as well, is the spirit of conquest. And I don't think the spirit of conquest is even possible without that concept of curiosity. Curiosity allows us to learn about new communities. It's something that our ERGs really take hold of and push throughout our organization. So our ERGs are not only for a member of that community, but it's for allies and for anyone within the organization who really wants to learn about someone different than themselves. So that's one way that we push it. We also push curiosity through creating an official CMO profile. So if you think about the heads of brands like Hennessy, like Dom Perignon, like Whispering Angel, like Ace of Spades, so on and so forth, those are the CMOs. And we really make sure that they fit a profile that is aligned with different cultural competencies. We want to make sure that those leaders are definitely curious. They're pushing curiosity throughout their teams, and they're always learning new things about new cultures. I think it's a vital step in innovation. And we're also offering numerous opportunities for our organization to share their ideas, to collaborate, and even driving that innovation with platforms where we have competitions on new ideas and we offer prizes with the best one and so on. But really honing into that concept of curiosity.
You know, Deloitte conducted a diversity, equity, and inclusion in the beverage alcohol industry study and found that only 10% of female survey respondents think there has been a significant positive change toward women in the last 5 years across the alcoholic beverage industry. Less than 20% feel that the efforts their company makes in the DEI space have been very successful in creating a better workplace. Even more telling is that women rank the alcoholic beverage industry in the bottom 3 of all industries for attracting and retaining diverse talent. Can you share your perspectives on inclusion in the alcoholic beverage industry?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I would be remiss if I did not mention that LVMH is nearly 70% women, and that's all ranking. So within leadership, middle management, and junior talent. So we're really proud of that statistic, and that's all throughout LVMH, but MH is very close to that number as well. So really proud of that statistic. I think that if you I'm a firm believer in the saying that if you see it, you can be it. So having that representation means a lot to our women throughout the organization. As far as the inclusion part, we have numerous ways on how we drive accountability, how we drive awareness, and so on to really exhibit those examples of inclusion. One being a workshop that all of our marketing and commercial employees go through, which is effective IDE communication. And this really prepares our organization with the tools and resources needed, as well as the language on how to combat or not combat, that's not the right word, how to deal and handle any issues of discrimination. So as I said before, we are a 3-tiered system, so we don't own that route to consumer. So we have a lot of partners, our distributor partners, we work with external accounts, with agencies, and so on. So we want to make sure that we know how to handle these situations with folks that may not be internal, as well as those who are external. So we teach them how to handle it to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, but we also offer this training to our partners so they know how to handle these situations. So they're speaking the same language as Moët Hennessy and really representing our brands in the right way, as well as knowing the reporting mechanisms around it so everyone feels safe, included, and secure in their roles and their positions throughout the industry.
I want to go back about 4 years ago. After the murder of George Floyd, the luxury, fashion, and alcoholic beverage industries made promises to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion internally. They created diversity councils, appointed chief diversity officers, and developed special programs for underrepresented groups. 4 years on, the movement seems to have lost some steam. There definitely have been successes, but DEI budgets are being cut and teams are shrinking. Do you think efforts are backsliding?
I definitely have seen some backsliding for sure. I mean, you can't help but notice what is going on from a political POV as well as just in the news, where you see major organizations cutting their DEI budgets and so on. But I think it's due to a few things. I think it's fear, risk of being sued and things of that nature. I think it's folks really turning this around and maybe focusing on these different demographics is not inclusive. I'm not a believer of that because I believe in intentionality, and you really have to be intentional on driving the needle in the parts that you are underrepresented. Otherwise, we are not creating equity. But all in all, I think what needs to happen is DEI needs to do a better job at tying these initiatives back to the business. As I told you before, my strategy is very much tied to every single part of our organization. And I think that's so important because you have to show the proof in each of those sides. I think another part of that is accountability. We drive accountability with our leaders as well as our entire organization. Every single employee at Moët Hennessy has an objective within their talent review process that is directly tied to inclusion, diversity, and equity. There's guidelines around it, so you're not just picking any and everything, but I think accountability is so important within these, as well as consistency. consistency with your leadership messaging, consistency with your community partners, as well as your leaders throughout the organization, really, really driving that messaging from the top down.
Some say the conversation needs to be reframed to focus more on diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business imperative, that it impacts financial performance, innovation, and attract and retain talent. Do you think companies should view it as a business driver?
Absolutely. I mean, there's endless research that proves that point. If you look at the diversity of thought, you don't have to just look at this from a race or gender perspective. There's so many different forms of diversity that you need to encompass throughout your organization, whether it be experience, whether it be socioeconomic status, whether it be sexual orientation, race, gender, so on. There's so many age is a huge one. We have to make sure that we're future proofing our business for the next generation. So there's different components of this, and I think we're so honed in on that race and ethnicity portion of it that we're forgetting about the different areas of diversity that is much needed in order to drive business. If you look at a table of, let's say, all women, we are not going to be able to appeal to the male consumer because we don't experience the things that males experience. So it's a general simple fact that you need diverse teams in order to appeal to a greater population and consumer.
It may seem a little bit of a paradox that a luxury industry, which prides itself on the idea of exclusivity, can actually embrace the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In recent years, many well-known luxury brands have spent large sums of money on initiatives which address environmental and social issues. So do you think luxury brands can be exclusive and inclusive at the same time? And do you think consumers can reconcile the exclusive nature of luxury brands with a public image of sustainability, environmental, or social awareness?
I do. And I actually love this question. When I created the strategy at Moët Hennessy, I used the concept of redefining luxury, what I call comfortable luxury. And it's really this idea of inclusive exclusivity. So I'm going to give you something that's a little, it's going to sound a little shocking, but I'm not a super, I'm not a super religious person.
We're ready for it.
Okay. But I think it gives the sense really well. So when you think of Christianity, right? God accepts people based on what he's done for them and not on anything about them specifically. So when you think about inclusive exclusivity, we're really looking at the loyalty. The loyalty gets you rewarded, meaning you get access to these different, whether it be sales or events or so on. So I think of this inclusive exclusivity as really, it's open to all people. There's no, dress code, there's no fee, but instead cultural currency is really based off of this knowledge and access. And I think that's the new norm when we're talking about luxury. You can look at our Vuitton stores or, people who are buying Dom Perignon. They don't look like someone who is flashy, dressed in all luxury items. They're wearing dirty sneakers, a white t-shirt, and so on.
Right.
But it's that concept of if you know, right. It's the knowledge and access that really is the real luxury. So we're looking for a loyal community of people who feel more like members and not customers.
I want to talk about what inclusion, diversity, and equity means when it comes to the marketing mix. Many of Moët Hennessy's maisons do their share of marketing primarily targeted at more high net worth customers. So when it comes to the communications part of marketing, which is the most visible part, how has inclusion, diversity, and equity played a role in creative development, whether it's ad campaigns or brand ambassadors or social media, things like that?
I mean, at the end of the day, we are a for-profit organization.
Right.
We are a business. But I think it's that concept of we're doing what's best for business, and what's best for business is reaching all types of consumers. The larger the consumer, the larger the, the rewards or profits. It's also what our people want, what our employees want. There's so many different studies and researches around the power of people. So if our people are happy, if they feel included, if they feel like they belong, they're going to work harder, smarter, be more innovative, all of the things that really drive those marketing campaigns. I think the necessity of having someone within the DEI space is again encompassing that brand component of my strategy. So finding those gaps. So I'll give you a prime example. When I first started this position, we did some insights research around our brands. Our former CEO asked me to really hone in on those brands that needed help in touching different demographics. Mm-hmm. So we looked at Dom Perignon. We found that Dom Perignon was highly indexed by the Latino and Hispanic consumer, although Dom Perignon had no ads geared towards that demographic. Right. So I think it's really important that we find those gaps and really, really find an authentic approach to dive into those communities. Because again, we are a for-profit organization, and if we're seeing those gaps, we need to get that market share.
Moët Hennessy works with a number of suppliers, and they're critical to the company's success. You also have IDE standards when choosing suppliers to partner with. You launched a supplier diversity program that offers suppliers an opportunity to be certified by Moët Hennessy. Can you share a little bit about that program?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started within this organization, again, we are a 3-tiered system. So one of the first things that I did was I added IDE, so inclusive diversity and equity language, into our partnership agreements. We want to make sure that we are partnering with organizations that have the same values and ideals as us. So there's no issues in translating that to our consumers. With our supplier diversity program, we are certifying 1,000 diverse-owned businesses, something we're extremely proud of, but we also hold something to really give exposure to these diverse-owned businesses. It's called Impact Day, where we actually spend an entire day talking about the power of supplier diversity for our business, which drives innovation, it drives competition, and it also allows us to really tap into different communities. We talk about that. And then the second half of the day, we actually give the platform to multiple diverse-owned businesses to share their capabilities to all of our brands. And this is not only presented in front of Moët Hennessy, but it's also presented to LVMH. So we're talking heads of brands, we're talking procurement teams. It gives them a great platform to really be noticed. And I think that's the biggest gap is just really that exposure and opportunity to present their capabilities to these major brands. So really proud of that initiative.
You know, we're living in a world of KPIs and the idea of return on inclusion. It seems it can be hard to measure a complex outcome like inclusion to identify and quantify the many effects of inclusion on a company's performance. What are some of the biggest things you're talking about with your teams inside Moët Hennessy when it comes to measuring IDE projects and initiatives, whether something works or it didn't work? Are there KPIs that you look at?
Absolutely. Obviously, we look at representation all the time. We have something that is not yet rolled out, but it's in the process. It's called the People Dashboard. And this is basically a platform for our leaders to take a look at and really have a transparent view on their team. So looking at the diversity of their teams, the last time someone on their team was being invested into from a professional development point of view, and so on. So really getting metrics around that and representation, like I said, but also ensuring that feedback is a two-way street. We can't just have our leaders being the one in charge who doesn't receive feedback back. So we really hone in on the concept of feedback. We survey our population to ensure that they feel like they belong, they feel like they are included, represented, and all of those things. But when you look at this from a strictly business point of view and taking away that really important people aspect, we look at how have our DEI strategies externally gained impressions, how have they increased sales, how have they increased placements within accounts with our products. So there's a lot of different ways that you can measure this. You just have to be creative and not look at this just from a people lens.
How do you work with the financial leaders at Moët Hennessy to implement strategies around IDE?
First and foremost, I think supplier diversity is a major one. We work directly with the procurement and finance teams to really drive this business, looking at our rate of spend, where our spend is centered around which demographics, which type of companies, which parts of the organization we're spending the most and the least in, where do we need to, look at those gaps. But also, I think beyond the financial parts of this, we just work with the decision makers, the CEO, the CFO, the heads of brands, and so on, really working close with the leadership team to drive these initiatives and speak the importance of them, not only to our organization, but our business as a whole.
A lot of people that work in the luxury business that listen to this podcast, what do you think the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at a luxury company needs to bring to the table that may be different from similar positions in other industries?
That's a great question. I think you need to have everything that any DEI professional has, which is really that understanding of ignorance, having patience that this is not a race, it is definitely a marathon. Changing hearts and minds is not an easy task. And really understanding that there is power in differences. And honestly, the baseline of that is just you can have different POVs, you can have different thoughts, experiences, so on. But the bottom line is that you need to have respect and be respectful of everyone, because we're all bringing something new and different to the business. And that in turn is going to drive profits. I think the other thing that you'll need is really that power of influence. I think if you are not an influential leader, then you're not really going to make a difference within this space.
So what do you say to companies who feel they perhaps have regressed in their IDE efforts?
What do I say to them?
Yeah.
I would say you're in big trouble. I would say you're in big trouble. If you look at the trajectory of our nation, especially within the US, we are becoming more and more diverse. We're becoming multiracial. All of those things lead towards that way. So if you don't have your diverse teams and really appealing to those different demographics, then you're in big trouble. You are not future-proofing your business, and you're not going to appeal to the masses.
So Tiara, my final question is the luxury item question, which I ask all my guests. So if you were stranded on a deserted island and you could only have one single luxury item with you, what would that luxury item be? It can't be any form of air or water transportation to get you off that island, or anything that requires mobile service so you can call somebody to get you off that island. It's just you, lots of sand, palm trees, lots of ocean, maybe a hermit crab crawling up the sand or something like that. It's just you deserted on this island. What would that one single luxury item you would like to have with you?
That is an extremely hard question. I think all the rest were very easy.
I know.
I would say, honestly, it's something so easy, and I think there's so many different forms of luxury. So mine would absolutely be a pen and a paper, to write about my experiences, my thoughts, so the next person can be more prepared if this should happen to them. I'm all about passing the baton, and I think that's a great way to do it.
Tiara Chesmer-Williams, Vice President and Global Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Moët Hennessy USA. Thank you so much for joining me on the luxury item.
So appreciate the time. Thank you so much, Scott.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.